Once again, welcome back to Mr. Scare. I have noticed that you guys enjoy listening to night driving horror stories. So for today's horror podcast, I have 7 new road trip horror stories. But before I begin, make sure that you have subscribed to Mr. Scare for regular uploads. So I work the night shift, so apart from the creepy things that I experience at my workplace, I am also driving at ghostly hours all the time. So one time I got permission to get home early from work because I was sick, and I decided to take the longer and slower road home. It was less bumpy, and although a longer road, it was a safer, and more importantly, easier way to drive home. So just for context, my usual way takes me 20 to 30 minutes to get home, but depending on the traffic lights, this way takes me around 40 to 50 minutes. It was obviously a longer route, but because of the lights, I didn't have to concentrate on the road as much. I was going through the town and managed to make all the lights so far. The time was somewhat like 3:20 a.m., so no one was on the road, and maybe that made it a little creepy. It was a cool misty night, and as usual, I saw a red light coming up, so I slowed down and stopped. I knew that light was going to take a while, so I whipped out my phone to check my messages. And as I was scrolling through my Instagram feed, I heard a bang on my passenger side door. The sudden loud knocking scared the shit out of me, and I dropped my phone on the floor and looked over to the window to see no one. At least for the first few seconds, because at first, there was no one to be seen at the window, but then slowly, a middle-aged drunk man rises from the bottom of the window, smiling like a creep. He did not even get to the top and just stopped in the middle of the window and slowly started tilting his head from side to side. It didn't look like he wanted food or anything, he just got some pleasure upon seeing me. So he just kept on staring into my soul until I felt like I was getting hypnotized. I mean, I never intended to pull my windows down, but I had already pulled them nearly halfway down. I kinda snapped out of it when his finger ring hit the door while he had tried to put his hand inside the car to unlock it. Needless to say, that was the only time when I've ever run a red light and touched the red line on my car's speedometer. In retrospect, I should have seen him somewhere around when I got to the red light. But I never did. I wonder how. But if he was a ghost or a spirit, what would be the need to unlock the door to enter inside? Maybe he was just a creep who wanted to steal my car or mug me. I got home and rested. Another time, I was taking my usual way home. I normally finish at 6:30 in the morning, but because of some scheduling issues at work, I got sent home at 4:30 a.m. So it was around 4:50 a.m., and I was doing like 90 miles an hour on the back streets heading towards my house. My high beams were turned on as I listened to music at full volume, having a great time by myself. I came around the corner, and it was quite a long road. But up the road within close distance, I could see someone in the middle of the road, wearing a white hoodie. So I flicked my high beams off and started slowing down, thinking that he was going to move. But he didn't. I stopped like 3 or 4 meters away from him and saw that it was a white sheet draped over a standing stick thingy, with a piece of paper attached to it in big bold writing, saying "Come closer and have a look." Now I am not sure if it were some teens having some fun and pranking the drivers, or if I was going to get mugged after getting out of the car. But not being an idiot, I very quickly floored my car around the sheet and gunned it toward home. I got home and made sure everything was locked. I have a few more, but these 2 have been among the scariest that I have ever experienced. Because, unlike other instances, here I was probably just a few moments away from disaster. When I was in high school, my friends and I used to drive out to this graveyard that was just outside Hobart, Indiana. This was literally in the middle of nowhere, and at night it would be dark as hell. The entire cemetery gave off vibes of a top-level horror story. It was not so huge in the area, and it was claimed or rumored that there was an angel statue in the very middle of the graveyard. And whenever anyone got close to it, the temperature was supposed to drop. We had tried it before, and it did seem like this happened, like the temperature took a sudden drop. But I'm sure that it had something to do with just the weather. So one night, like 12 of us go just to get scared. We walk around the graveyard, explore it, and have a good time in general. I mean, we were teens at that time, and we got a kick out of such dumb things. We left from there after a while. We had in 2 cars. I'm driving behind the first one, and being a dumb 18-year-old, I'm following the girl driving the car in front of me, pretty closely. It was a back road. It was not even well lit, and there were no other cars in sight for miles. Of course, that was the case, since it was late as hell. All of a sudden, she swerves all the way into the other lane. I panic watching her do this, and I swerve too, thinking that there must be a deer in the front. She slows down and comes to a stop. I turn to spot the deer. But no, it was not a deer. There was a tombstone, that too in the middle of the goddamn road. It sounds like the stupidest thing you've ever heard, but I swear it. It was right there, in front of our eyes. Initially excited about this discovery, we gradually had a bad feeling about it. It looked freakish. And we had just been in a cemetery where all others looked the way they were supposed to. And this was no different, except that it looked demonic or sinister to all of us. It kinda compelled us or tempted us to get down and get close to it. But none of us dared to. And I'm not sure why or how, but all of a sudden, there was dead silence all around. No bugs or wind or any other sounds at all. I never intended to stay there for even a minute more, but as I said, we were dumb teens. Someone from the car ahead of us opened the rear seat door to step out. But before they could, a loud growl made us jump from our seats. It was followed by a subsequent set of loud footsteps that were heading toward us from the side. We floored it and gunned our cars to the town. We did not stop until we got to the main town and then parked on the side to speak about it. We decided to go there the next day to check it out. But yes, during the daytime. What kinda disturbed us was that it was our usual route while coming back home. And we never encountered such a gravestone in the middle of that road before. The next day, the previous night's encounter was still fresh in our heads as we drove towards it. We were very extremely alert this time. We reached and found that there was no such gravestone there. We were stunned. We drove around the cemetery twice and never run into it. And there were no signs of any digging done on the road too. It was as if either there was no stone in the first place, or it vanished into thin air. And I'm not sure as to which possibility should scare me more. And listen, I don't believe in ghosts. In fact, I don't believe in heaven or hell, or anything of that. But I know what I saw. And apart from me being one individual who might have imagined it all, there were 11 other people who saw the same thing. We talked about it for years to come. But no one seemed to believe us or our story. They thought we were just fooling around and making up a story. When I was about 17, my parents scolded me and sternly asked me to get home because a huge snowstorm was about to hit town. Not the town, the entire city, and surrounding parts, to be honest. I was at my boyfriend's place at that time and having a fun time with him. So when I was asked to get my butt home, I threw a fit, and my parents were like,
"Fine. But you have to drive yourself home and be home by curfew."
Oh, and just so you know, my curfew time was 8:30 p.m. Now I had never driven in the snow, especially in this kind of a snowstorm. It hadn't blown out in proportions, but there were signs that it was going to get worse and violent from there. I left his house around 6:30, and there were already about 4 inches of snow on the ground. And it was still snowing quite heavily. It was also pitch black out there. Driving in the snow is just creepy to the core. There's endless darkness around, and a white floor. So poor visibility and poorer grip on the road. Now both my boyfriend and my parents lived in this small farming town, so I was only about 10 minutes up the road. So it should have been easy to get home, right? Hell no! The whole drive from his home to my home took around an hour. I couldn't see anything with the vortex of snow around me. There weren't many streetlights in my town. I could barely go and drive at a speed of 3 or 4 miles an hour in my tiny car. I might have been able to drive a little faster, but I did not want to risk my car breaking down in the middle of the road, and that too during a snowstorm. As I almost reached home and I could literally see my street, my headlights illuminated a little girl in the middle of the road. And what caught my attention was that she was not dressed for the weather at all. I slammed my brakes, but due to the snow, I skidded for about a quarter mile. I felt the impact of hitting her. I was praying that she would not have been hurt much. When I finally did stop, I got out with my phone's flashlight to look for her. But there was nobody to be seen. I decided that it was best to get home and tell my parents. We lived next door to the town's fire department, so my dad had called them up and asked them to go and look for her. They easily found where my car had put the brakes on, but nobody was there. There was damage to my headlight, so I definitely hit something, but they couldn't find anything. To this day my dad says it must have been a deer, but I know what I saw. And what surprised me more is that there were no trail or tracks of anything else on the road, apart from my car's tire tracks. Had there been a girl or a deer, there would have been some footsteps visible. I have no explanation for what I saw or for what hit my car that night. But it was something that gives me chills even today. I was around 23 years old when this happened to me. 3 of my girlfriends and I were driving from a city to a rural country house for a chill weekend. This was back in early 2005. The trip was fun. We were having fun on our journey to the place too. And everything was going normal as we got more and more rural and deeper into the countryside. It had started to get darker and darker as time passed, but we weren't so bothered by it. Towards the end of our journey, it was dark outside, and the road was barely visible to the eye. It was so twisty and bendy to drive on, and we were all getting more and more anxious since we didn't really know where this house was. Honestly, it felt like we were driving into the middle of nowhere. The area was totally isolated. Just trees all around us, and the path in front of us. Then suddenly, as we slowly twisted and turned down this black road which we could barely see, this haunting, creepy, horror-like music started playing from out of nowhere. It sounded like some haunting organ funeral music. And no, it wasn't coming from the radio. We knew that it was a possibility, but the radio was off for an hour or so because there was no network. Despite that, we turned it on again and then switched it off to hear the static. So it wasn't coming from the radio, and it was no one's phone too. It seemed like it was coming from inside the car. But it was weird. Not the music. I mean, yeah, the music was weird and creepy. But what I found weird was that all of us were sitting on different sides of the car. And if it was coming from one specific outlet, we all would have turned towards it. But that was not the case. All of us checked our very close to our bodies as if it was coming from within us. It was as if the music was playing in our heads. But in our heads? How? If one of us was hallucinating or imagining the music, then it would have been a plausible explanation. But this was unbelievable. It lasted for about 4 to 5 minutes as we drove through the route. For some seconds, it would get louder and then get lower, as if we were in some sort of a game. I mean, that's what my brother suggested when I narrated the incident to him. He said that in video games, music starts playing whenever we are near some enemy. And the music actually faded away as we drove further, and it ended once we moved past that area. We all heard it, and it was creepy as hell. To this day, I don't know what it was. But if it was some creepy ghost, then I am thankful to God that I could escape before it could do any harm to me. I went with my cousin on a trip to a beach in Mexico. While we were heading back from the trip, I decided to have a little nap, and in that nap, I had a dream about the television on the bus going on and off, and my cousin praying. I also dreamed about an old man with a little girl in a blue dress asking for a ride, to which I told the bus driver to not stop, because it was a spirit. Then in the same dream, I noticed that since we did not pick up the old guy with the little girl, everything changed and there was a fire on the hill, and we were trying to escape from it. At the end of the dream, we ended up in a little town in the middle of nowhere. I woke up from my dream suddenly, and when I told my cousin this story, he laughed at it. Then we started talking about other things, and all of a sudden, the televisions on the bus started to malfunction, and the bus driver told us that it was nothing. We both were a little worried and cautious about it. The both of us decided to go and talk to him, and that's when we noticed an old man asking for a ride with a little girl wearing blue. Now we were in the middle of the mountains, and there was no one living there. Literally no towns and no life. And then a few miles later, there he was again, asking for a lift. I told the bus driver mockingly that it was a ghost. He laughed and told me that it was the third time that he saw it. My cousin was so scared that he started praying. I was starting to think that I was still in a dream. But I guess I wasn't. We got into a military checkpost where there were only 4 guys there. One of them told us to be careful because since it was winter season, the roads were slippery because of the altitude of the mountain. Around 20 minutes later, we noticed a huge fire in the mountains, and the bus stopped working. There was no cell phone signal, and there were no cars passing by, and it was freezing outside. Finally, a girl passenger managed to find some signal on her device and contacted 911. They were coming for us, and while we waited inside the bus, there was something or someone outside knocking on the windows of the bus. And not just me, but all of us could hear little feet running around on the roof of the bus. We went outside to see what it was, and it was nothing. 5 ambulances arrived and took us to a little Masonic town. So yeah, we ended up in a town in the middle of nowhere, exactly like my dream. Ever since I got my license, I've done a lot of driving, especially long distances across the country, and that too at night. I've rarely ever had anything unexplainable happen to me, but I've had my fair share of scary and creepy stuff. One time when I was driving out in the West, I saw a road covered with hundreds of rattlesnakes. The only explainable part is that they like the heat of the pavement, and that might have pulled them all outside their dwellings and on the road. The scary part is that I drive a big semi-truck, and I gotta go to different places. So I was running over rattlesnakes, and for some reason in my mind, I am thinking that one of these snakes is going to be hanging underneath the step up into the truck and bite me when I get out at the next stop. Needless to say, I just chose to jump from the truck as far as I could. But then when I got back in the truck, I realized that I had left my door open when I went about my business. So I started thinking if one of those snakes entered the truck. I drove the entire way with one eye on the road, and the other eye searching for snakes hiding inside my vehicle. I remember another incident when I had moved to a very rural town in Michigan and lived outside of that in an even smaller town. That town was what one might call the dark sky territory. Anyway, it was my first night staying there. I had only seen a couple of locals, and they definitely looked like the hills have eyes kinda way, with U-shaped mullets and the bald spot on the top. Everyone kept eyeballing me as I drove by. Anyway, there was a thunderstorm there, and the power went out in the cabin where I was staying in. It was the darkest experience I've ever been in. Pitch black all around the place. Something or the other was making noise all night long, and I couldn't see my own hand in front of my face. Back then I didn't have a flashlight, lighter, cell phone, or anything with me. In the morning when I got up, the windows on my car were all busted, and there were no branches laying around. So yup, I got in the car and just drove the hell right out of Michigan to Minnesota. Way before COVID happened, Walmart used to be open 24/7. My husband had the second shift, so he would get off work late at night. After work, we would go and visit Walmart. So this took place at around 3 or 4 a.m. in the middle of the night. On our way back home from Walmart, maybe a block from our house, we saw an elderly woman walking in the middle of the street in her nightgown. She had white hair, and I won't deny that we didn't get a bit freaked out. We calmed down and drove up to her. We asked if she was okay, to which she replied,
"I'm looking for my husband. Have you seen him anywhere?"
She looked confused. We didn't know where she lived, so we called 911. We told her we would wait with her till her husband showed up. After a few minutes, the cops showed up. It turned out that she had Alzheimer's disease and lived 3 blocks down. She had wandered off and was looking for her husband who had passed away a long time back. My husband had another creepy experience. This happened back when he was still my boyfriend. We weren't driving, and we were sitting outside my old house around 2 a.m. It was the summer before going back to school for our senior year. We're talking with our camping chairs outside, snacking on some goodies. That was when we saw a man dressed in a long sleeve and white shirt, sliding. Not walking, but sliding in the middle of the park. I used to live in front of a big park, and at night it would be very dark with trees all around and only a couple of light poles. It was so creepy to see that it still gives me the chills.